The history of the iPhone jailbreak is not just a hobbyist movement. It is a decade-long conflict over computational sovereignty. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, they introduced a closed-loop computing model. This architecture was designed to enforce a walled garden where Apple acted as the sole certificate authority. They controlled the kernel, the file system, and, most importantly, the digital signature checks that prevented any unauthorized binary from executing. For Apple, this was a security necessity. For the technical community, it was an unprecedented restriction on hardware ownership. The first major offensive in this war was led by a 17-year-old named GeoHot, known as GeoHot. Hot's initial attack was at the hardware abstraction layer. He realized that the baseband processor, which handled cellular communication, was locked to the AT&T network via encrypted firmware. To bypass this, Hotz used a physical voltage glitch. He manually soldered wires to the processor to disrupt its security checks during the boot process. By inducing this hardware fault, he forced the device to accept modified code, achieving the first carrier unlock. This was a primitive but effective breach of Apple's hardware-level security. However, the war shifted rapidly from hardware to software exploitation. A group known as the iPhone Dev Team discovered that the iPhone's mobile Safari browser had a critical buffer overflow vulnerability. This led to the creation of Jailbreak Me, the most elegant exploit in history. By simply visiting a website, the browser would execute a malicious script that triggered a kernel-level privilege escalation. In seconds, a standard user was granted root access. This bypassed Apple's code signing enforcement, allowing the installation of an unofficial package manager called Cydia, developed by Jay Freeman. Apple's response was a strategy of rapid patching and legal deterrence. They viewed jailbreaking as a threat to the integrity of the iOS sandbox. They argued that breaking the jail exposed users to malware and compromised the stability of the cellular network. Apple began a cat-and-mouse cycle. They would release a firmware update to patch the zero-day vulnerabilities, and the hackers would immediately begin reverse engineering the new kernel to find a new entry point. This EP explores the moment the software gates were kicked open, shifting the power balance from a corporate monopoly back to the individual administrator. The battle for the root directory had officially begun. FTER, the success of Jailbreak Me. Apple realized that software-level security was not enough. The war for the iPhone had moved beyond simple application tweaks. It was now an all-out battle for the boot sequence. Apple's engineers began implementing a secure boot chain, a process where each stage of the startup verifies the next using cryptographic signatures. The goal was to ensure that only trusted code could ever touch the hardware. But the hacking community, now organized into groups like the iPhone Dev Team and Chronic Dev, was about to deliver a blow that Apple could never recover from. In 2009, a legendary exploit known as 24KPWN was discovered. This wasn't a userland bug that could be patched with a simple iOS update. This was a Bootrom exploit. In systems architecture, the Bootrom is the very first piece of code that runs when you turn on the device. Crucially, this code is read-only memory, ROM. It is burned into the silicon at the factory. This meant that once a vulnerability was found in the Bootrom, Apple was powerless. They couldn't send a software update to fix a physical flaw in the chip. For the first time, hackers had achieved permanent dominance over the hardware. If you owned an iPhone 3GS with the old Bootrom, Apple could never kick you out of your own system. While the technical war raged, a parallel economy was being built by Jay Freeman, known as Sauric. He created Cydia, an unofficial decentralized package manager. Cydia was the antithesis of the App Store. It allowed users to install tweaks, code injections, that modified the behavior of the operating system itself. Want to change your system font? Cydia. Want to use your iPhone as a Wi-Fi hotspot before Apple allowed it? Cydia. Sauric's philosophy was built on digital freedom and the right to modify the tools we use every day. Cydia turned the iPhone from a consumption device into a high-performance development platform. Apple's response shifted from technical to legal. They approached the U.S. Copyright Office, arguing that jailbreaking was a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA. They claimed that bypassing their technological protection measures was illegal, and that it compromised the security of the entire cellular infrastructure. This set the stage for a landmark legal battle. The question was no longer just about how to hack the phone, but whether you had the legal right to control the silicon you paid for. As Apple prepared their lawyers, the hackers prepared their most powerful weapon yet, a new Bootrom exploit called Shatter, proving that in the world of computer security, once the foundation is cracked, the entire building belongs to the intruder. By 2011, the jailbreak community had achieved something unprecedented. They forced the most valuable corporation on Earth into a corner. Apple realized that no matter how many layers of cryptographic verification they added to the boot process, a group of dedicated volunteers would always find a way to escalate privileges. So Apple shifted its strategy from pure defensive engineering to corporate assimilation. They began to look at Cydia not as a den of hackers, but as a free R&D department. Features that define the jailbreak era, the notification center, the control center, multitasking, and copy-paste, were systematically integrated into iOS. This was the embrace, extend, and extinguish tactic. Apple wasn't just patching bugs. They were killing the reason to jailbreak by making the OS just good enough for the average user. At the same time, the technical landscape was becoming infinitely more hostile. Apple introduced kernel patch protection, KPP, and hardware-level security like the Secure Enclave on the iPhone 5S. This was no longer about finding a simple buffer overflow in Safari. This was about bypassing dedicated security coprocessors that guarded biometric data and encryption keys. The cat-and-mouse game turned into a high-tech arms race. The exploits required to crack modern iOS became so complex that they were no longer the work of a teenager in a bedroom. They required the resources of a nation-state or a multi-million-dollar security firm. This complexity gave birth to a dark, lucrative industry, the zero-day market. In the early days, hackers like GeoHot or Comex released their tools for free, driven by the philosophy of open access and computational freedom. But as the value of an iOS exploit skyrocketed, freedom was replaced by profit. Companies like Zerodium began offering up to $2 million for a single remote, untethered jailbreak. Why release a tool for free to the public when you could sell it to a private firm or a government agency? The public jailbreak began to die as the exploits were weaponized for digital espionage. The hackers weren't fighting for your right to change your font anymore. They were selling the keys to the kingdom to the highest bidder. Today, the jailbreak war has reached a stalemate. Apple has successfully hardened the kernel to a point where a public jailbreak is nearly extinct. But the legacy of this decade-long conflict remains. Every security feature you enjoy on your smartphone today was forged in the fires of this war. The hackers taught us that hardware ownership is a myth unless you control the software, and Apple proved that a centralized authority will always trade freedom for security. The war for the root directory didn't end in a victory, it ended in a complete transformation of how we interact with technology. We are no longer the administrators. We are the residents of a highly secure, perfectly manicured digital prison, where the guards are so efficient that most people have forgotten they are even behind bars.